right, now on to the very cool person who's here to share something with us today, and that is Miss Annie Zaleski. She's a Cleveland, Ohio-based writer, editor, journalist, and marketing consultant. She is a 2002 Harvard graduate. Her work has appeared in dozens of print publications, including Rolling Stone, Spin, Billboard, Alternative Press, Village Voice, Los Angeles Times, Cleveland Plain Dealer, New York Journal, News, Boston Herald. We can keep going for a while here. Amazon, AV Club, Salon, Billboard.com. She's also been on the radio stations, NPR, CBC, Sirius XM Canada, NPR. Very lucky to have her with us, Annie Zaleski.
Yep, can you guys hear me in the back? Awesome. Anyway, thank you guys for having me. Like Thomas said, I'm a Cleveland-based music writer. So my talk is going to be called Waiting for the Gift of Sound and Vision, which some of you might know is a David Bowie lyric. It will become clear later. So anyway, I just want to tell you a little bit more about myself then. I am a writer. I started off actually as an intern at Alternative Press right here in Cleveland, way back in the 90s, before they were covering the Warped Tour scene. And so I still write for them, which is exciting. And then from there, I was actually also the music editor in an alt weekly in St. Louis. And I ran their blog and things like that. And so in between, I guess, as Thomas mentioned, I've freelanced for a bunch of places, which has basically let me interview all of the rock stars that I loved growing up. So I've interviewed Johnny Marr, I've interviewed Bjork, I've interviewed some Rock Hall inductees, Alice Cooper, Gene Simmons, Andy Partridge, members of Fall Out Boy. So I've actually forgotten more people that I've interviewed than I actually remember at this point. So there you go. And then over the summer, I guess, I'm probably most proud of that I actually wrote the liner notes to the deluxe edition of R.E.M's Out of Time. And I got to interview all the band members and different people involved in that. And they are actually my favorite band of all time. So I thought about retiring, but I need to make money. But it was pretty awesome. But anyway, so it sounds like I have the best job in the world, right? I basically hang at home in my pajamas, talk to rock stars all day, and write about them. The pajamas part is pretty cool, especially today. I'm generally never dressed this early in the morning. My husband will attest. And it's pretty cool. But the reality is that music writing is actually really difficult. And I know it seems that it might be glamorous too, you're hanging out backstage with rock stars. That generally never happens. What's challenging about it is that you have to try and describe something subjective, basically what songs sound like, without sounding too abstract, vague, or pretentious. The last part especially is very, very easy to do. There's a very fine line between being clever and being just completely wince-inducing. And plus, when you're writing about music, you have to take into account that music involves multiple senses, right? So you might feel the thumping of the bass in your chest if the song is up really, really high. So how does that impact your thoughts on the music? And sometimes a song just really doesn't click with you unless you see someone performing it live and you can see the passion in their eyes or how they're playing their guitar. And that really kind of affects your, impression of it. So how do you account for that? In a weird way, music is sort of a three-dimensional entity that's also invisible. So it's no wonder that there's a kind of an oft-attributed phrase that's been basically attributed to everyone from Elvis Costello to Frank Zappa to Martin Mull, that's writing about music is like dancing about architecture. And I feel like that's true to a point, but I've never actually thought that that phrase was very fair. First, it implies that writing about music is impossible, that's something that's doomed to failure, and that's not true. And plus, that's not necessarily the most precise way to describe music writing. To me, it often feels like you have to invent a whole new language to talk about the relationship between sound and emotion, right? Simply because, you want to describe why music is successful. And that's a really big job. And so that's probably why it's also so difficult to avoid cliches in music writing. So take R.E.M., for example. They have a song called South Central Rain. So the guitar riffs are jangly. Or Franz Ferdinand's Take Me Out, which is kind of a post-punk song. The guitars might be angular. Frank Sinatra, I think we all know Frank Sinatra, he's kind of a crooner. Bruno Mars, he's funky. And then there's punk songs like White Riot or Anarchy in the UK, which are aggressive and fast and abrasive. So there's nothing wrong with using those adjectives I mentioned as descriptors. They're not incorrect, and they make sense in context with the songs. And when you're writing, it'll be satisfactory, editors won't bat an eye, you'll still get work. But it's not necessarily the best writing you could do. And so this philosophy is kind of applicable to everyday creative life, right? You reach for the same tools, the same ideas, the same routines to get things done, especially when you've done something a million times before. It's easier to fall back on what you know or how you describe something to get the job done. And your work will be passable, laudable, and in today's overscheduled world, that's good enough. In a sense, I keep in mind that recycled inspiration is only stale to those who've seen it before. But it's far more difficult to kind of dismantle your go-to thought processes and strive for distinction, to look at something familiar from a new angle and figure out how to describe it better. In a general sense, you can kind of look at it, say, it's like looking at a zebra and describing and painting a picture of what the coat looks like without using the words stripes or black and white. It's challenging, right? And it really forces you to question what you know or think you see and use different aspects of your brain. So how this relates back to music writing, it's kind of opening your mind to possibility, listening to a song without expectations and clearing your head to let inspiration in. In that sense, music itself is both a creative art and then something that spurs on creativity. So maybe you'll hear a song and it'll conjure a flashbulb memory, a memorable date you were on, or an encounter on the radio when you heard it when you were out in public. Maybe a song will bring up a time when you heard the song in another context where you were either happy or sad. And maybe a song will remind you of another song and it'll produce an emotional association that way. In terms of the songs I mentioned earlier, so you can consider them a little bit differently. So REM's South Central Rain, the guitars could be chiming maybe, or sound like pealing bells. Franz Ferdinand's Take Me Out could be described as a lurching roller coaster or a punk pogo. Frank Sinatra, he's a lounge singer looking to kind of seduce a late night crowd at a jazz club. White Riot sounds like a car careening around a curve with no brakes. Bruno Mars, he's an 80s throwback who loves Prince and Zapp. So these observations are just offhand too, and not necessarily the best, things you could say. But on a different day, if you're in a bad mood, music could sound different. It could sound boring or just not appealing. So in that sense, sound is malleable, and music's malleable as well. So the Smiths and Morrissey are one of my favorite kind of artists then. So when I was 15, I loved them. And I would probably say that back then, when I was listening to them on my little Walkman, that they understood my teen angst and understood my loneliness and how I felt that no one would ever love me. Today, though, I'd maybe point out that The Queen is Dead has, political and kind of societal insights. And, maybe note how buoyant and even kind of happy and jovial Johnny Marr's guitars are on a song like This Charming Man. Listening to music becomes a richer experience, and songs develop more hues and shades of gray as you gain wisdom. So maybe if you learn about music theory or the historical context of a record, and it'll make you see the song in a different light. Perhaps a lyrical allusion will make more sense after you've encountered a poem or a book. Even reading an interview with an artist might make you see music in a different light and glean new insights into how it came together. Age and perspective, in short, can produce wisdom and different insights. And that's another valuable lesson to keep in mind kind of when tackling creative projects, right? If you look at something with fresh eyes, or in music writing's case, fresh ears, you might find that these things say different things to you. Nothing is set in stone, and there are always opportunities to glean new insights. So take this REM Out of Time project I did. So since I heard it first in the early 90s, I've probably listened to that record hundreds of times, starting back then up until this past summer. And I've also written about the record several times in the past as well. Each time I heard new and different things in the music, new musical inspirations or instruments in the mix. But then I was asked to write the liner notes, which required even more listening, more research, interviews with band members, and more original insights. Honestly, it was kind of daunting. I wasn't sure if I had anything new to say. But after the process was over and I did 7 interviews and listened to the record probably 10 more times, I actually felt like it was an entirely different record. And I felt like I understood it even 100% better. For example, band's frontman, Michael Stipe, told me that the guests on the record had great significance. KRS-One, who's a rapper, was on Radio Song and was a gesture to kind of music's future, where it was going at the time. Kate Pearson of the B-52s, who made a cameo on Shining Happy People, among other things, kind of was a note to REM's roots, since both bands came from Athens, Georgia. So prior to him telling me that, I had sort of taken these artists' presence for granted on the record, never really questioned why they were there. But now, however, I could see them being a part of the record had special significance, which made their appearances carry that much more weight and made me see the songs in a different light. So that's just one example. Above all, music and sound are great ways to get you out of a rut, creative, emotional, or otherwise. I mean, throw on a dance song and you'll physically exorcise things kind of weighing you down. You know, a syrupy ballad you throw on might cause a good cry, which is kind of what the doctor ordered for mind-clearing catharsis. A goofy pop song might bring on a belly laugh, which is often the best medicine. And hearing a favorite song, no matter what the genre from your artist, is guaranteed to put a spring in your step. So in that sense, circling back to the title of the talk, Waiting for the Gift of Sound and Vision, isn't completely correct. Sound and vision are gifts, but we don't necessarily have to wait for them to appear. We have the ability to create our own vision using the power of sound. Thank you.
Q&A. If anybody has questions, just raise your hand. We got those questions. Go for it.
Is there a mic or anything, or is it just
There,
For people.
there is. You can actually come up here and shoot.
Yeah.
So with the liner notes for Out of Time, how long did that process take?
Oh, just repeat the question.
Okay, so he asked me how long the liner notes process took. So I actually found out, they asked me to do the liner notes in the very beginning of April of this year. But just the way things work with music and record labels and things like that, I didn't actually start working on them until the first week of August. And I had about 3.5 weeks to do them.
Oh my God.
It's okay, it's cool. I'm used to it, it's cool. So I ended up writing maybe about 3,000 words in about 3.5 weeks. And then I had to do a couple little edits, but nothing major. So it was a long process, it was a drawn out process, the contract was signed, I was just sort of waiting for the go, I think. Any more questions?
Where do you see journalism going from what you've seen in the last 5 years?
Yeah, that's a big question. I don't think I've had enough coffee yet this morning.
repeat the question?
So he asked me where I see journalism going in the next 5 years. Man, that's the thing. I definitely see journalism going more digital. I mean, I think that's sort of inevitable, that just with the way technology is going and with the way people are consuming news, it's going to be more important than ever. I'd like to think that publications will put more money into kind of the really interesting sort of investigative pieces that are maybe more multimedia with beautiful pictures and video and things like that. So it's more kind of an immersive, tablet optimized experience. But that costs money and that costs time. So ideally, that's where we would go. You know, I do still think that print has some sense, just because there is nothing sort of like picking up a newspaper or a magazine. I know that makes me old-fashioned, because that's sort of how I came up. But I do think that just the idea, the tangible object, when you see this, there are actually a couple of music magazines like Pitchfork and Paste that are doing these like quarterly beautiful like bound books. So I do think that there is sort of it's kind of like the vinyl revival, right? That you want to have something big in your hand, that you're holding on. It's not just an MP3. So I do think there is, in that sense, that there might be more of that coming as well. Kind of having, something that's a little bit more a little more special, a little bit more collectible. So that might be another option too. But it's a scary time, you know. It's a very, very scary time, and you know, just hoping that the freedom of the press, you know, keeps being allowed to exist.
Thank you.
Yeah.
What about there's Ellen Willis and the Ann Towers and the Annie Zaleskis of the world. How do young women find sort of a niche? There just aren't as many women music writers, and there's a dearth that I noticed, but they obviously always bring different perspectives. And so, how do we carve out more of a space for them?
So she asked, how do we carve out more of a space for young women and music writers, in music writing and music writers? You know, part of it is, you know, being people who are established, you know, mentoring younger people and being willing to kind of share information and share and say, you know, hey, this is what I learned and here's a contact, and kind of helping out that way. A lot of it is, I always tell people, do it yourself. Start writing, start a Tumblr, you know, start a blog, and don't wait for anyone to tell you you can do it. Just kind of start doing it. What also needs to help is to have more women in editorial power, being on mastheads, being, you know, assigning editors and being able to do that. There are several sites that have gotten a lot better about it, like Vice and Noisy have a lot of females and female music editors. Pitchfork as well has a very female-heavy staff, which is nice. So that's helped. It's also a matter of editors also doing outreach though, and so in trying, you know, not going to necessarily like go-to writers or say, oh, I want to write about Bob Dylan, I think I'll reach for a man. You know, opening their mind and saying, hey, there might be a woman who has something to say about this. So it kind of goes both ways in terms of you keeping your mind open to, you know, basically new voices.
As a writer, I have a friend that is kind of upset that Bob Dylan was nominated for the Nobel Prize. I was just wondering, as a music writer, how you feel about that.
She asked how I feel as a music writer about Bob Dylan being nominated for a Nobel Prize, because you have a friend that's upset. Why is your friend upset out of curiosity?
He doesn't think he should have been given the prize for literature.
Interesting. So she said that her friend is upset because she didn't think that he should have gotten it for literature. So I think that's very interesting, because I think if you think about someone like Bob Dylan, his entire career has basically been songs that are, I mean, to me, they've always seemed very literary and very, you know, these fictional stories and these very vivid, evocative, you know, image-laden songs. You know, to me, they've always been more poetry. So I could see how he would be upset with literary. I mean, it made a lot of sense to me. I'm kind of sad that Leonard Cohen didn't get it first, you know, and so maybe like posthumously he could be, you know, recognized. But I mean, it actually made total sense to me. And, you know, I mean, his whole reaction to it and saying, no, I'm not going to show up, and but no, now I am, but no, I'm not, but I'll send a speech. And his speech was lovely. I don't know if you read it, but he was, you know, he was very gracious about it and kind of talked about his thought process. And it was very, it sounded like an author, you know, so I think he totally deserved it, to be honest.
Let me ask a question that was asked earlier. Again, where do you see journalism going? And I don't mean we're going to publish on Facebook, or we're going to figure out how to do an essay on Twitter, or the media that you're going to distribute your work on. But where do you see journalism going with respect to the content? What's in it, how it's presented, how you gather it, what you write about and stuff. So for instance, in the sports world, back when your grandfather was a baseball fan, sports writers used to travel the trains with the baseball teams. And the guys would play cards together, et cetera, et cetera. And you never ever read in the newspaper about Joe Blow's affair, alcoholism, any number of other issues. Here we are, a number of decades later, the ball players and the sports writers often seem at loggerheads. You only get to see the ball players or talk to them in a locker room. I see rock and roll even more controlled. I can imagine if you were to interview ELO, which is how many people are in that group? More than 3, right? I would be willing to bet that if you did it in a hotel or ballroom in New York City, there would be more PR people in that room than there are members of the orchestra. How can you, as a journalist, do anything meaningful in those kinds of situations?
So his question was basically, where do I see journalism going with sort of the way that the practice itself has sort of evolved, in the sense that, now if you're going to interview a rock band, you might not necessarily, kind of, I guess maybe even what Cameron Crowe used to do, go on tour with the band, have no PR people around and get all of the dirt. Or, baseball writers used to be on the trains with the players, and, now it's a lot more controlled. I mean, basically, journalists have to be a little bit more cunning, to be very honest, in terms of where you need to go. You need to, and especially now, you see access is everything, right? So you have to be a little bit more clever, I guess, in how you do reporting. It is different in the fact that sometimes you might not necessarily get to interview the person you're actually writing about. You have to write around, and you have to talk to sources, and you have to go around. So in a sense, it's so social media, however, though, is a really good tool for doing that, in terms of finding people, and a lot of conversations happen on social media, and journalists get tips there that are invaluable. And you have to obviously vet them, but there's a lot of, it's looking for the conversation, not necessarily where it used to be, and kind of finding the stories yourself. And that's also something that is extremely different, and where I think journalism is going. You're not, sometimes, there's still PR people, you're still gonna get pitches, but a lot of times you have to find the story for yourself, and you have to do a lot more vetting, especially now because there is so much obfuscation going on, and it's hard to tell what's true and what's not true. So you have to be even more skeptical, I think. So in terms of where it's kind of going in that sense, there are a lot more tools journalists need to have now, and a kind of a different mindset. You have to be, it's a very weird time to be a journalist right now in that sense.
Is it difficult as a freelancer to be critical of the groups that you're writing about?
So he asked me, as a freelancer, if it's difficult for me to be critical about groups I'm writing about. That's actually an excellent question. So I guess it depends on the context in which I'm writing about them. So if I'm doing a show review and I'm reviewing a band and the concert's not good, I'm gonna say that. When you review concerts, you get tickets for free generally. And sort of the understanding is you're gonna write about it and you're gonna give your opinion. As long as it's a fair negative opinion, people generally don't, have anything bad to say about it. Where it gets a little trickier is that if, I get a record and I hate it, and I spout off on social media, and then later an editor might say, hey, do you want to interview this person? So in that sense, I'm always sort of very careful what I say online, just because you never know when something is going to, you might have something come back to you. And I think that's kind of almost everybody though. In terms of how you're giving opinions, because you honestly never know at this point what you say or who you meet. 5 years down the line, you might work with them. Or you might, come to a job and find out that they're your boss or something like that. So in a sense, I think that it's not just journalism, but I think in life in general, you have to do that. But it is true, I try to be careful in terms of, being critical, or at least being flippant, or, about things online, because, first off, it doesn't make you look good. And second off, you just sort of never know who's watching or who's listening. So he asked me if I always wanted to be in rock journalism, what other writers I like. It's funny, I actually did. When I was in high school, I worked on my high school newspaper, and I actually started an entertainment section in our little 8-page paper. And one of the first things I ever did was I reviewed Morrissey's show at the Lakewood Civic Auditorium in 1997. And I was all proud of it. I think we entered it in a contest. I think I got an honorable mention, so I was very excited. And then when I was in college, I worked for my college paper as well and doing entertainment. So yeah, for whatever reason, when I was in high school, I was either gonna go into computer science or music journalism. And I chose music journalism, much to the chagrin of my parents. But I made it work, so they're okay. But in terms of other writers I like, growing up I would read music magazines, so I read Alternative Press. And that's funny, there's actually a writer who I really like, who I'm actually really good friends with now, is Jason Pettigrew, who's based here, who just has this he has the ability to describe music and scenes in ways that I don't even know how he does it. It's very creative. So I always kind of admired that. And just reading Rolling Stone and Spin and kind of all the writers who would write for that, throughout the years. Whoever was writing the cover story, Jancy Dunn, and who I got to interview this year, who's just this amazing, wonderful writer. Jenny Zaleski too. She did a whole lot of music writing for Rolling Stone. So I always really admired her, kind of both of them as well, just because they just wrote, they were women writing for starters, and they were just really, really talented journalists as well, and just they were just very relatable.
What do you think about the class of nominees?
Oh man, so Catherine's putting me on the spot and asked me what I think about the Rock Hall nominees.
You don't have to answer.
Well, it's funny because what the guy sitting right behind you said, so I got to see, am I being taped? This year though, it's hard because there's 19 people, and I think honestly all of them have merit. And to try to narrow it down to 5, I think it's criminal. It's just you guys are cruel, man. I think Chic, I think they've been nominated, 10 times now? 11 times, and it is so long overdue that they're in there. Nile Rodgers, so it's Nile Rodgers and the late Bernard Edwards. Nile Rodgers has been a producer for everybody. He's worked with David Bowie, he's worked with Duran Duran, he's worked with Madonna. The man has stories for days. He's just incredible. And the way that they kind of put together dance music and disco in the 70s was incredibly influential and just incredibly underrated. So I think they deserve to be in. I'm trying to think who else was nominated. There's so many. Kraftwerk, I have to say, I think I also agree with Kraftwerk because so much of modern music would not exist without them. And so they're basically, German, Teutonic electropop, and, new wave, 80s music basically wouldn't exist without them. The late 70s music wouldn't exist without them. Dance music wouldn't exist without them. There's just decades of music that would be nowhere, kind of without their influence. So I definitely think them. The Cars. So the Cars are nominated, and they're kind of an outlier. But they had a very kind of brief career, but that was just packed with hits. And they really kind of were the bridge between kind of new wave and classic rock, and were just really, really good songwriters. And so if you look at their catalog, they had by the end it was kind of wasn't as good as we argue at home. My husband is a bigger 80s Cars fan. But they're good. So I think they deserve to be in. The MC5 was brief also career, but man, they were just incendiary. And in terms of their influence on Detroit and also rock and roll from decades on, honestly, I think completely deserves to be in. Who else am I missing there? Oh, that's right.
Joe Paez and Tupac and Shaka Khan.
And those two.
Yeah, see, I can't choose. I think Pearl Jam.
Joe Tex.
I think Pearl Jam. I think Pearl Jam probably, just in terms of their career, will probably get in just because they are, I think, they put together, they're probably one of the last big rock bands, right? That has a sustainable career. So, and they also kind of run the gamut of things. So I think they deserve to get in, but I don't know, Shaka Khan, you have to put her in. She's such an amazing vocalist and just a presence. So see, if I was, having a choice, there'd be 8 people going in this year. You can't just narrow it down. So I think that would be my 5, but and then there's Depeche Mode. See? Yeah. See. There you go, 5, and then I'll have a couple we grow on. another big question. So basically, she basically said that because I write about bands, I write about everyone from Taylor Swift to Bruce Springsteen, kind of looking ahead 10 years, who's going to have an impact, I guess, in 10 years, if anybody. It's hard because I think there's been a couple of articles that have come out too that people have said, rock and roll, the influence is waning a little bit, right? And I mean, the thing is that things go in cycles. So I think rock and roll has been considered dead once a decade since, the 60s basically. So I don't really hold too much stock in that. I think the artists that are sort of going to survive are the people that, put together good songs. Whether that's them writing themselves or kind of working with songwriters or just constructing kind of interesting music. I mean, you can argue, there's always a lot of arguments about Beyonce, for example, that she's not necessarily authentic because, she does X or Y. And I've never really subscribed to that because I think it's sort of unfair because if you listen to her vocals and just her presence, she is an artist and she's put together this amazing body of work for going on 20 years now. So I think in terms of having a career, she's definitely someone that I don't see kind of her influence waning, anytime soon. Taylor Swift too, love her or hate her, especially, kind of direction she's going. She's written a lot of really good songs. Songs that are still on country radio, songs that are on pop radio, and that's sort of hard to discount. So I think, the people that are gonna survive are the people that make music that you remember, that means something to you, that are sort of going to, in that sense, I guess. Did I answer your question?
For doing your research and your writing. What software tools do you use for your research and your writing?
He wants to know what software.
So he asked what software tools I use for my research and writing. So a lot of what I do is honestly, I still use a lot of hardcover books. Our house is my husband is laughing because our house is like floor to ceiling, like music, biographies and reference books and memoirs and stuff. So I still use, depending on ours, I have a lot of that stuff. But we also I try to go back to articles, that have been written in the past. So I'll kind of go deep on like fan websites and like archival stories, if I'm writing about an artist from like the 80s and 90s. So, kind of go back to the source. I'm kind of old school research that way, and that, you can't believe anything that's on Wikipedia. You have to go back and find the source. You have to go try to find, what the artist said themselves to kind of verify things. So that's sort of my approach. And a lot of it is facilitated by the internet. Honestly through Cuyahoga County Public Library, there's plain dealer archives going back to the 1860s. And I actually used that several times this year for stories, going back that long, and then also looking for other archival things. I went to the Western Reserve Historical Society was actually also an invaluable resource for a story I did. So, I kind of go, new school and old school, I guess.
I think we're about to be overrun by some school children, I think. Which is of that 10% of people that live in.
We teach 17,000 kids a year.
17,000 children a year come through the